Children always noticed the rope first. It swung lightly in Aliska's hands as if it weighed nothing, as if it were just another toy in the dusty courtyard where laughter still dared to echo despite the war pressing against every wall. On quiet afternoons, when German boots thudded in the distance and villagers pretended not to flinch, Aliska would step into the center of the square and begin her little performance. A flick of the wrist, a looping arc, a gentle snap against the cobblestones. Simple, harmless, almost foolish. The kind of trick people watched only because it offered a moment's escape from the hunger and fear that stalked them. Children clapped. Women smiled sadly, grateful for anything that reminded them of gentler days. Even the German soldiers, leaning against their commandeered trucks, barely spared her a glance. To them, she was just another Czech girl wasting time, swinging a rope like she dreamed of the circus instead of freedom. They laughed at how small she seemed, how quiet, how unimportant. In war, danger was expected to look sharp, metallic, armed. No one suspected it might look like a girl in faded shoes, practicing knots beside a well. Yet beneath that innocent rhythm, a different pulse lived, quiet, determined, and sharpened by loss. Aliska never missed the way the soldiers' eyes glazed with boredom, or how their trucks lined up in the same careless formation each day. She noted their schedules, their habits, their arrogance. Her rope, worn and frayed at the ends, moved with a precision no child could match. But no one questioned it. No one looked closely. That was the power of being dismissed. And somewhere in the future, though none of them could sense it in that peaceful moment, the same villagers who called her trick silly, the same soldiers who smirked as she practiced, would speak her name with awe and disbelief. Because the girl with the rope was not practicing a game. She was rehearsing a weapon. And in just 10 seconds, under the right sky and the right breath, that stupid trick would ignite 5 Nazi ammunition trucks and rewrite everything they thought they knew about her. Silence should have been a comfort, but under Nazi occupation it carried its own terrifying weight. In Aliska's village, silence meant the Gestapo had arrived before dawn, kicking in doors while lanterns still flickered in sleepy windows. It meant ration lines stretching down frozen streets, mothers clutching empty baskets, and German officers watching with the hollow eyes of men who enjoyed being obeyed. It meant conversations cut short the moment boots approached, children pulled indoors, curtains lowered in a heartbeat. Silence, in those months, became the sound of fear. German control tightened like a rope pulled slowly around every throat. Soldiers moved into farm towns that had once thrived on laughter and wheat. They set up checkpoints beside orchards, turned stables into barracks, and treated villagers like shadows, useful only when still and silent. Even the air felt different, colder, thinner, as if the occupation had stolen warm breath from the land itself. Aliska lived in that suffocating quiet. Her father had been taken during the first raids, his name added to a list the villagers whispered about, but never dared to say aloud. Her mother worked in strained silence, eyes always swollen from worry. Aliska learned early to keep her voice low, her footsteps soft, her emotions buried beneath layers of caution. Yet beneath her fear simmered something sharper, more dangerous, a resentment that coiled tighter each time she saw German trucks rumble through the square, heavy with ammunition and arrogance. Her rope became her refuge. Each night, when the world outside seemed too afraid to breathe, she practiced her knots in the dim corner of her home. The rhythm soothed her, loop, twist, pull, a soft snap against her palm, a dance of muscle memory and quiet rebellion. During the day, she performed in the courtyard not for applause, but to convince herself the world had not stolen every piece of who she used to be. The soldiers ignored her, thinking her harmless. Villagers pitied her, thinking her lost. But the truth lay somewhere deeper. In a world ruled by guns and brutality, Aliska had found strength in the one thing still fully hers, the rope winding confidently between her fingers. And soon, that quiet strength would find its moment. Grief has a sound all its own, and for Aliska, it began with the heavy knock on the door that made her mother's breath stop mid-step. 2 German officers stood in the doorway, snow melting on their boots, expressions carved from stone. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The folded paper they handed over, creased, stained, stamped with authority, said everything. Her brother, Tomas, accused of aiding the resistance, had been executed at dawn. The world didn't shatter loudly. It sank inward, collapsing with the quiet weight of something too painful to scream about. Her mother fell to her knees. Neighbors closed their shutters. Even the winter wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Eliska stood frozen, rope still in her hand, feeling the strands cut into her palm as if anchoring her to a reality she didn't want to accept. That night, she found a small note tucked inside Tomas's jacket, returned with his belongings. The ink was shaky, rushed, written in the kind of fear that comes when a man knows he will not see morning. Don't avenge me. Help them in your own way. The words trembled across the page, but the message was clear. Tomas didn't want her to pick up a weapon or run into danger blindly. He wanted her to find her own strength, whatever form it took. For hours she sat by the oil lamp, turning the rope in her hands. Loop, twist, pull. The knots came as easily as breathing. She remembered Tomas laughing as she'd shown him tricks as a child, calling her fingers fast as foxes. She remembered how he taught her that resistance wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was hidden in ordinary actions, invisible until it struck. The next morning, the village square felt different. The same soldiers marched through. The same trucks rumbled past. The same fear hung in the cold air. But inside Eliska, something had shifted. A quiet fire had taken root, fueled by grief but shaped by purpose. She watched the German ammunition trucks with a new kind of focus, her mind tracing paths, angles, possibilities. Her rope felt heavier now. Not a toy, not a comfort, a tool. Tomas had told her to help in her own way. She didn't yet know what that meant, not fully. But as she wrapped the rope around her wrist and watched the trucks disappear down the road, she felt her path begin to take shape. And for the first time, fear didn't stop her. It guided her. Rebellion meetings were usually hushed, tense gatherings. Men huddled around flickering lanterns, voices low. Maps spread across wooden tables, still smelling of sap. Eliska entered quietly, rope coiled in her hand like a secret she wasn't sure she had the right to share. The men barely glanced at her. Women were expected to carry messages, tend injuries, maybe hide supplies, never planned sabotage. But Tomas's last words burned in her chest, pushing her forward. "I have an idea," she said, and her voice sounded too small in the cramped barn. A few heads turned, surprised she'd spoken. She held up the rope. "I can set a trap for the German trucks. A tension snare that snaps the axle, flips the—" Laughter cut her off. Sharp, immediate, almost cruel. "A rope," one man scoffed. "What will you do? Tie their boots together?" Another shook his head. "Girl, this is war, not a children's game." Someone else muttered, "Tomas's sister, poor thing. Grief has scrambled her sense." The humiliation hit like a slap. Heat spread across her face, but she stood firm. "It can work," she insisted. Their trucks speed through the forest turn. "If I anchor the rope high in—" "Enough," the leader snapped. "We don't have time for foolishness. Go home. Leave sabotage to trained men." Trained men. She looked around the room, at their trembling hands, hollow eyes, the fear they tried to hide behind bravado. They weren't mocking her idea because it was weak. They were mocking it because it didn't come from them. A quieter voice spoke from the corner. "If she tries something stupid, it'll bring the Gestapo down on us all." The room murmured in agreement, and that was the wound that stung the most. Not that they doubted her skill, but that they saw her as a risk, a liability, someone whose courage was a threat instead of a weapon. She walked out without another word, rope clenched so tightly her knuckles paled. The cold night air bit her cheeks, but humiliation burned hotter. Every cruel laugh echoed in her ears. Every dismissive glance hardened into resolve. If they wouldn't believe her idea could work, she'd make them believe the results. Alone, the forest became her classroom, the occupation her unwilling teacher. Every morning before dawn, Eliska slipped from her family's cottage with her rope hidden beneath her coat, boots muffled by fresh snow. She learned quickly that Germans were creatures of habit, efficient, confident, and dangerously predictable. And if predictable, then exploitable. She watched from behind frost-bitten pines as the convoys thundered through the valley road. The first truck always came ahead of schedule, engine growling like an irritated beast forced awake before it wanted to be. Its headlights cut through the cold haze, illuminating clouds of exhaust that drifted like dirty ghosts above the snow. Aliska memorized the rhythm, the clatter of metal, the grinding gears, the way the driver always leaned slightly left on the tight bend near the frozen creek. Then came the second truck, heavier. She marked how its tires sank deeper into the slush, how it kicked stones farther, how the vibrations hummed through the ground long before it appeared. The third and fourth followed at exact intervals, 15 seconds apart, sometimes 16. Enough for one trap to reset, or one rope to strike twice. She crouched low as boots pounded past during foot patrols, their cadence steady, almost mechanical. She noted the way soldiers shouted to each other, bored, unaware, because to them, this quiet road was safe. No mines, no ambushes, just a rural detour beneath their notice. The diesel burn clung to her clothes. The cold stung her eyes, but she kept watching. She drew diagrams in the dirt with trembling fingers. The curve of the road, the slope angle, the tension required for a rope to snap an axle or pull a wheel sideways at speed. She tested knots on tree trunks until her palms blistered. She measured weight by loading stones into a basket until it sagged just like a truck suspension. And as she worked, the childish, silly trick shed its innocence. Rope became leverage. Knots became engineering. Timing became weaponry. Day after day, Aliska learned the way machines breathed, how they hesitated on icy turns, how momentum betrayed them. Germans trusted their vehicles more than the land beneath them. That would be their undoing. By the end of the week, she no longer held a harmless length of rope. She held a blueprint for destruction, quiet, simple, deadly. And the Germans had no idea a village girl was studying them with the precision of a hunter preparing for her first kill. The morning of her first attempt, the forest felt too still, so silent it made her heartbeat sound reckless. Aliska knelt beside the narrow bend in the road, hands numb as she tied the final knot. Frost clung to the rope fibers, glittering like harmless crystals that masked the danger she hoped they carried. She checked her setup again, anchor stone in place, tension set, angle measured by guesswork and instinct. It wasn't perfect, but she didn't have the luxury of perfect. She slipped into the underbrush just as the first rumble echoed through the trees. Her breath came fast, forming fragile clouds she tried to swallow back down. The truck appeared, a hulking shadow, headlights slicing through the cold. Its engine roared as it approached the bend, snow spraying in uneven bursts beneath its tires. Aliska pulled the rope tight. Too early. The truck swerved, not in the violent collapse she'd imagined, but in a startled, clumsy lurch. The rope snapped with a painful whip crack, stinging her hands as it recoiled. The truck skidded, fishtailed slightly, then regained control. The driver shouted something she couldn't hear over the pounding of her own heart. Within seconds, the vehicle vanished up the road unharmed. Aliska froze. Failure sat heavy in her lungs. Her hands shook as she crawled backward, burying the frayed rope under a mound of snow. Patrol boots thundered nearby. She held her breath as soldiers scanned the trees, rifles raised. One wrong twitch and she'd die here, killed not as a resistance fighter, but as a foolish girl with a broken rope. Minutes stretched into an eternity before the patrol moved on. Only then did she run, branches tearing at her coat, shame burning hotter than fear. She collapsed beside a fallen birch, burying her face in her hands. She had risked everything, for nothing. But beneath the humiliation, her mind kept working. The angle had been wrong, the torque too weak, the tension misjudged. A truck moving at that speed required more force, more precision, than she prepared for. Fear clawed at her chest, but so did understanding. The forest had not defeated her. It had taught her, and she would not make the same mistake twice. Aliska thought she was alone in the forest, alone with her humiliation, her trembling hands, and the sting of rope burns across her palms. She didn't hear the footsteps until a quiet voice emerged from behind a stand of pines. "You misjudged the torque," the man said calmly, as if commenting on the weather. Eliska spun, heart hammering. A stranger stepped into the dim light, tall, mud-splattered, wearing a coat too plain for a German, too practical for a villager. His eyes were sharp, assessing, as though he'd already taken her apart and put her back together in his mind. "I watched you," he continued, hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. "You're lucky the patrol didn't." Fear surged. "Who are you?" "Someone who shouldn't be here," he replied with a faint, tired smile. "So, British. Call me Rowan." Her breath caught. British agents were rumors, ghosts whispered about by villagers who never saw them. But here stood one, studying her failed rope trap as if it were a complex machine worthy of respect. Rowan crouched beside the snapped rope, running his fingers along the frayed edge. "This wasn't stupidity," he murmured. "It was design. Improvised, flawed, but clever. Clever. Not ridiculous. Not childish. Not stupid." The word struck her so deeply she couldn't speak. He stood, brushing snow from his knees. "Show me what you were trying to do." So she did, haltingly at first, then with growing clarity, explaining angles, weight, timing, the way truck tires bit into snow, the blind spot in the bend. Rowan listened without a trace of mockery. When she finished, he nodded once. "Your thinking is sound. You just need better execution." For the first time since her brother's death, hope stirred. That night, under the cover of pines and moonlight filtered through clouds, they worked together. Rowan showed her military not stronger than anything she'd tied before. She demonstrated a tension trick he'd never considered. They tested anchor positions, measured pull force using stones and fallen logs, recalculated timing using Rowan's pocket watch. Each failure became a lesson. Each adjustment sharpened the design. By dawn, Eliska's rope trap was no longer a child's trick. It was a weapon shaped by determination and engineered precision. Rowan handed her the rope, meeting her eyes. "You're dangerous when you think," he said. For the first time, she believed it too. Night pressed against the forest like a living thing, thick with fog and cold enough to freeze breath midair. Eliska crouched low beneath a twisted pine, rope coiled over her shoulder like a serpent waiting to strike. Her fingers shook, not from fear alone, but from the brutal temperature biting into her skin. The moon was only a thin smear behind drifting clouds, offering just enough silver to outline the narrow dirt road where 5 Nazi ammunition trucks would soon thunder through. This place had once been a peaceful logging route. Now it was a vein pumping fire into German weapon stockpiles. A road meant for ruin, if she had her way. Rowan's voice was a whisper beside her. "Slow. Precise. Just like we practiced." She nodded, swallowing the dryness in her throat. The forest amplified every sound. The creak of branches, distant owls, the groan of ropes sliding across bark as she pulled it through her hands. She looped it around a sturdy birch on one side of the road, then across to an ironwood trunk on the other, forming the first arm of her mechanism. The friction now tightened with a soft snap. She exhaled shakily. One piece done. They moved like shadows. In the fog, even Rowan was barely a shape, just a moving silhouette helping guide the rope across frozen mud and brittle undergrowth. Eliska tied another loop, threading the line into a pulley system fashioned from scavenged farm tools and a hinge Rowan had salvaged from an abandoned cottage. Each knot mattered. Each angle determined how the trucks would fall. "Listen," Rowan murmured suddenly. Eliska froze. Far beyond the mist, a distant rumble vibrated through the ground, the kind of low, rolling thunder made by heavy engines and overloaded axles. Her heart lurched. She tightened the last anchor point, fingers fumbling as adrenaline surged through her veins. The convoy was early. 2 minutes, Rowan whispered. Maybe less. Fog billowed over the road, like a slow-moving ghost as Eliska dragged the final length of rope into position. She wedged it into a notch between 2 rocks, pulling it taut until the fibers hummed with tension. If she misjudged by even a second, the first truck would roll over harmlessly and everything. Her brother's last words, the humiliation, the training, the nights of fear, would collapse with it. The rumble grew louder. Headlights flickered in the fog, like approaching eyes. Rowan squeezed her shoulder once. It's yours now. Eliska's breath came in shallow bursts. She crouched by the trigger line, a simple loop she'd fashioned from memory, a trick she once used to impress children. Now it would decide the fate of 5 trucks carrying enough explosives to level a village. Engines roared closer. Tires crunched through frozen mud. The fog parted just enough for Eliska to see the dark shapes emerging. One truck, then another, then 3 more behind them, hulking beasts of steel and death. Her fingers tightened. Her pulse thundered. The rope trembled. And with the convoy seconds away, the forest held its breath with her. For one suspended moment, the forest was nothing but breathless silence, fog drifting, rope drawn tight, engines grinding forward through the dark. Then Eliska pulled. The line snapped upward with a violent twang, cutting through the mist like a striking whip. The first truck never saw it. Its front axle slammed into the rope's invisible wall, jerking sideways, with a metal shriek that ripped across the night. The entire vehicle lifted, lurched, and flipped onto its side, skidding across frozen mud in a storm of sparks. Then the world split open. A thunderous blast erupted from the overturned truck, its ammunition igniting in a white-hot bloom that lit the forest like a second sun. The shockwave punched Eliska off her feet, slamming her into the ground as heat roared over her. For a heartbeat she heard nothing, only a ringing void. But the explosion had become a fuse. The fire leapt to the second truck, devouring its canvas cover before anyone inside could even scream. A blinding flash followed, exploding outward and hurling debris into the night. The third truck braked too late, slamming into the inferno and erupting with a deafening blast that shook the earth beneath her ribs. Soldiers shouted in panic. Shouts cut short as the fourth truck detonated in a burst of shrapnel and flame. The final vehicle tried to reverse, tires spinning wildly on ice, but the chain reaction reached it in seconds, swallowing it in a final, towering fireball. 5 explosions. 10 seconds. The forest transformed into a hell of roaring flames, twisting shadows, and falling embers. German soldiers staggered blindly through smoke, screaming orders no one could hear over the roaring inferno. Ammunition cooked off in rapid snaps, like gunfire from the sky itself. Eliska crawled behind a fallen log, lungs burning, hair singed, vision swimming. A tire hurled by the blast crashed into a tree inches from her head. Heat scorched her cheeks, smoke clawed at her throat. But she was alive. Through the firelit haze, Rowan stumbled toward her, eyes wide with disbelief. "You did it," he rasped. "God, you actually did it." The night that began with fog now burned with the light of a victory no one saw coming, born from a rope trick everyone had mocked. By dawn, the smoke still clung to the treetops like a dark bruise spreading across the horizon. What remained of the convoy lay scattered in twisted heaps, blackened steel, scorched timber, and cratered earth marking the road, like a warning carved by the night itself. German investigators arrived within hours, boots crunching across frozen mud as they examined the wreckage, with grim disbelief. To them, the explanation was obvious: explosives, hidden charges, Allied saboteurs with crates of TNT, and expert timing. No one imagined a rope. Officers barked orders, measuring blast radii, sketching diagrams, and arguing over how such a coordinated strike could happen without a single gunshot being heard. Some insisted the Allies had developed new underground mines. Others swore the Czech resistance had acquired British bombs. A lieutenant muttered about ghost saboteurs, earning a slap across the face from his superior. Fear spread faster than facts. Convoys were halted for hours, sometimes days, as soldiers probed every ditch, every branch, every patch of dirt for traps that didn't exist. Supply trucks crawled through villages in single-file lines, their drivers pale with nerves. Rumors took on lives of their own: invisible explosives, silent detonators, a new Allied weapon that could blow trucks apart without warning. In Berlin, High Command erupted. Reports piled on desks, each more infuriating than the last. 5 ammunition trucks lost, hundreds of shells destroyed, dozens of men killed, all without evidence of explosives. Find the saboteurs, the orders demanded. Find the weapon. But there was no weapon to find, only a length of rope carried away into the forest by a girl no one noticed. As German frustration hardened into paranoia, one truth became clear. A simple trick had shaken the Reich more deeply than any bomb. The Gestapo arrived before the ashes cooled. Their black cars growled into the village at dawn, doors slamming like gunshots, boots striking stone with a rhythm meant to terrify. They questioned everyone, farmers pulled from beds, mothers clutching children, elders forced into the cold with rifles at their backs. No one knew the truth, yet every trembling denial only fueled the officers' rage. Homes were searched, barns overturned, and families dragged into the square under the accusation that someone, somewhere, had helped the saboteur. Eliska watched from the tree-line, breath freezing in her throat. She saw the fear she had caused, unintentionally, unbearably. Her plan had saved Allied lives, yes, perhaps turned the tide of a local front. But the price was being paid by people who didn't even know her name. Guilt pressed against her ribs until she thought it might break bone. The mountains called to her not as refuge, but as punishment. So she ran, through fir branches scraping her arms, through snow swallowing her footsteps, through a silence heavier than any pursuit. Nights in the mountains were merciless. Wind clawed at her coat, hunger gnawed at her resolve, and the memory of every crying villager echoed in the caves where she hid. She curled into herself, shaking, whispering apologies no one could hear. For the first time, she wondered if she'd done the right thing, if saving strangers on a battlefield justified endangering the people she loved. But on the fifth night, alone beneath a sky sharp with stars, she remembered her brother's final message. Help them in your own way. His voice, tender and unwavering, rose above her fear. She sat up slowly, gripping the rope coiled in her pack like a lifeline. She couldn't undo the damage, but she wasn't done fighting. Eliska wiped her tears with trembling fingers and breathed in the cold mountain air. If the Gestapo wanted the girl with the rope, they would never find her. Not until she chose to be found. In the months after the explosion, whispers of a convoy killer spread through resistance networks across Europe. British SOE agents, baffled yet intrigued, quietly requested sketches of the strange rope mechanism the Czech villagers swore they had seen glimpses of. The reports were inconsistent, the details fragmented, but the idea was unmistakable. A simple tension-triggered trap capable of flipping heavy military vehicles without a single gram of explosive. It sounded impossible. It sounded brilliant. Within a year, SOE engineers were experimenting with their own versions: reinforced ropes, camouflaged anchor points, friction-based release triggers. They refined what Eliska had invented in a moment of desperation, turning her improvised trick into a formal sabotage tool tested in Norway, France, and the Balkans. Some versions worked flawlessly. Others failed spectacularly. But the concept remained, a weapon born from simplicity, precision, and the mind of a girl no one ever believed. Then, as the war ended and classified documents were sealed, Eliska's name disappeared. Reports referred only to local asset or female civilian saboteur. Her drawings were archived without attribution. For decades, military historians assumed the rope tension method was an SOE innovation, never knowing it began in a village courtyard with a girl practicing tricks for laughing children. Only in the 1990s, when Cold War secrecy unraveled and long-hidden files resurfaced, did fragments of her story return: a witness testimony, a sketch in unfamiliar handwriting, a British agent's note calling her the bravest mind I ever met. But even then, most accounts remained incomplete, her name blurred by time and bureaucracy. Because history remembers explosions, victories, and generals. It rarely remembers the invisible hands that made them possible. History forgets women like Eliska, but the fire she lit still burns,